The neighborhood prided itself on order. Lawns were trimmed to the same height, mailboxes matched down to the shade of paint, and cars were parked with military precision in driveways that never saw an oil stain. The HOA newsletter went out like clockwork, reminding everyone of acceptable holiday decorations, approved fence colors, and the exact hours trash bins were allowed to be visible. Most residents liked it that way. Predictable, controlled, safe. So when the moving truck rolled in on a Tuesday afternoon, it didn't take long for people to notice. Curtains shifted. Garage doors paused halfway open. A few neighbors slowed their evening walks to get a better look. The house had been empty for months, and empty houses always sparked curiosity. But this was different. This wasn't just about who was moving in. It was about how she looked when she stepped out of the truck. She wore a sleeveless black shirt, despite the mild weather, and that's when the first thing stood out. Tattoos. Not one or two small ones you could politely ignore. Full sleeves. Dense, dark ink wrapping around both arms, disappearing under the fabric at her shoulders and reappearing on her hands. Symbols, words, shapes no one could quite make out from across the street. Her hair was cropped short, not styled, not soft. Functional. She moved with purpose, lifting heavy boxes by herself, barely breaking a sweat. Within minutes, the neighborhood group chat lit up. Has anyone seen the new person? Do we know if she's renting? Those tattoos are a lot. Someone joked about whether the HOA handbook covered visible body art. Another neighbor replied with a laughing emoji, but then added, still though, doesn't really fit the vibe here. Fit was everything in that neighborhood. Fit meant blending in. Fit meant no surprises. The woman unloading boxes didn't blend in at all. She didn't wave when a neighbor stood at the edge of their driveway pretending to check the mail. She didn't smile or offer small talk. She worked. Box after box, furniture wrapped in moving blankets. A motorcycle rolled down the ramp and parked neatly in the garage. That alone raised eyebrows. Motorcycles were allowed, technically, but they were rare, and this one looked serious. Not a weekend cruiser. By evening, the HOA president had already driven past twice. Slow passes, not obvious enough to be called spying, but deliberate enough to be noticed. He made a mental list. Tattoos. Motorcycle. No friendly introduction. Possible violations unknown. He reminded himself to check the bylaws again, just in case. The next morning, someone posted photos in the group chat, taken from across the street. Slightly zoomed in. The woman jogging at dawn, tattoos fully visible now, muscles working with each stride. Is this appropriate? The message asked. I'm just thinking about the kids. No one said exactly what they meant, but everyone understood the implication. Speculation spread fast. Maybe she had a criminal past. Maybe she was in a biker gang. Maybe she was trouble. The tattoos became the centerpiece of every theory, as if ink alone told the full story. No one mentioned that she obeyed the speed limit, parked perfectly within the lines, or kept her yard immaculate from day one. Those details didn't fit the narrative forming in their minds. At the first HOA meeting after her arrival, her name came up without her being there. Someone said they felt uneasy. Another said they were just asking questions. A third suggested sending her a copy of the community guidelines, especially the section on maintaining neighborhood standards. The room hummed with agreement, with that particular energy that comes from people convincing themselves they're being reasonable. No one considered simply introducing themselves. No one wondered why someone might choose a quiet, rule-heavy neighborhood on purpose. They saw a problem before they saw a person, and once the label was applied, every glance, every silence, every tattoo became evidence. The neighborhood slowly closing ranks around the idea that the newcomer was something to be managed, corrected, or watched closely. Once the idea took hold, it spread quietly but thoroughly. People stopped seeing a woman and started seeing symbols. The tattoos stopped being art or personal history and became warnings in their minds. Each design was imagined as proof of something dangerous or unstable. No one asked what they meant. No one considered they might mark milestones, losses, or service. Ink, to them, was shorthand for poor judgment. At the playground, parents subtly pulled their kids closer when she passed on her morning jog. Conversations lowered in volume. Eyes followed her arms instead of her face. Someone whispered that tattoos like that usually meant a rough past. Someone else nodded and added that you never really leave that kind of life behind. The statements weren't based on anything she'd done, only on how she looked, but they were spoken with confidence, as if appearance alone were evidence. The irony was that the same people preaching tolerance in yard signs and social posts were suddenly experts in profiling. They told themselves it wasn't prejudice. It was caution. They weren't judging, they said, just being aware. Awareness, in this case, meant assuming the worst without a single conversation. Even the small things became suspicious. If she didn't wave back, she was unfriendly. If she wore sunglasses, she was hiding something. If she worked out late at night, she must be aggressive. Every neutral action was filtered through the story they'd already written for her. No one noticed that she always picked up litter on her block during her runs, or that she helped an elderly neighbor lift a fallen trash bin without saying a word. Those moments didn't match the image they'd built. At one HOA meeting, someone brought up visual concerns. They didn't say her name, but everyone knew who they meant. Tattoos were mentioned as a potential issue for community image. A resident joked about whether long sleeves could be encouraged. Laughter followed, not cruel, but comfortable. The kind of laughter that comes from believing you're on the right side of things. The judgments grew sharper in private spaces. In kitchens and text threads, the language changed. She wasn't just different. She was a risk. People speculated about weapons, about anger issues, about whether she'd snap one day. Someone claimed to have heard raised voices from her house, which turned out to be a TV left on during a workout. Another said they smelled smoke one evening and wondered aloud if she was burning something illegal, even though it was just a grill from 2 houses down. What bothered them most was that she didn't try to soften herself. She didn't cover up. She didn't offer explanations. She didn't perform friendliness to ease their discomfort. That refusal was taken as defiance. In their minds, a good neighbor would have known to reassure them, to make herself smaller, to prove she belonged. Her silence felt like a challenge, and challenges made people uncomfortable. They compared her to former residents, to spouses, to children who had moved away. None of those comparisons were fair, but fairness wasn't the goal. Comfort was. Familiarity was. Anything outside that narrow range felt like a threat to the careful balance they believed they'd created. The tattoos became shorthand in conversation. The tattoo lady. The one with the arms. She lost her name before anyone learned it. Once someone loses their name, it becomes easier to talk about them like an object, a problem to be solved. What none of them realized was how practiced she was at being watched, how familiar it felt to have eyes track her movements, how little their stares registered compared to places she'd been before. While they were busy assigning meaning to her skin, she was living her life exactly as she always had, structured, deliberate, unaffected by gossip she didn't hear and assumptions she didn't care to correct, moving through the neighborhood with the same calm focus she brought to everything. While the judgments piled up quietly, waiting for a reason to turn into action, she noticed the change almost immediately. Not because anyone confronted her, but because patterns are hard to miss when you're trained to see them. The way conversations stopped when she entered a space. The way doors closed a little faster than necessary. The way smiles appeared only after a second of hesitation, if they appeared at all. None of it surprised her. She'd walked into rooms like this before, places where people made decisions before learning facts. What did surprise them was her response, or rather, the lack of one. She didn't rush to explain herself. She didn't offer background stories or soften her edges. She didn't introduce herself with a rehearsed friendliness meant to put others at ease. She stayed consistent. Morning runs at the same hour. Groceries on the same days. Garage door opening and closing with quiet precision. Her life ran on routines that didn't require approval. When HOA notices started appearing in her mailbox, she read them carefully. One mentioned parking alignment. Another referenced visual harmony. The language was vague, intentionally so. She adjusted what needed adjusting without comment and ignored what didn't apply. No angry emails. No confrontations. Silence, for her, wasn't weakness. It was efficiency. Neighbors expected irritation or defiance. Instead, they got neutrality. If someone said hello, she nodded. If someone asked a direct question, she answered it plainly. No extra information. No emotional padding. This unsettled people more than open hostility would have. They couldn't place her, couldn't categorize her reaction. She wasn't playing the role they'd written. There was a moment one afternoon when a neighbor, emboldened by curiosity and wine, asked her outright about the tattoos. The question came wrapped in a compliment, but the intent was clear. She looked at the woman, considered her for a second, then said they were important to her, and left it at that. No stories. No explanations. The conversation ended awkwardly, and the neighbor walked away dissatisfied, as if denied something owed. Her calm wasn't accidental. It was cultivated. Years of training had taught her that most situations didn't require reaction, only observation. People revealed more when you didn't rush to fill the silence. She let the neighborhood reveal itself. The gossip, the assumptions, the need to control what they didn't understand. What they mistook for coldness was discipline. She woke early, trained hard, kept her house in order. Her yard was maintained not to impress anyone, but because disorder bothered her. She recycled properly. She followed the rules that mattered. The ones about respect and responsibility. The rest was noise. Children noticed her before adults did. Kids are less interested in fitting people into boxes. They saw a woman who could do pull-ups on a tree branch and lift heavy things without help. They waved. Sometimes she waved back. Sometimes she didn't. It depended on the day. There was no calculation behind it. A few neighbors tried to provoke a reaction. Passive comments about community spirit. Jokes about long sleeves in summer. Questions asked a little too loudly. She let them pass. Every response she didn't give frustrated them further. They wanted reassurance or resistance, something to validate their narrative. Her quiet confidence denied them both. At night, she sat on her porch and watched the street the way others watch television. Not out of suspicion, but habit. Awareness was a default setting for her. She noted who walked dogs, who argued, who drank too much, who kept to themselves. Patterns emerged. She didn't share them. The truth was, she didn't need acceptance. She had chosen the neighborhood for its order, its predictability, its quiet. Those qualities made it easier to focus, to rest, to train. The opinions of strangers held little weight compared to the standards she held herself to. While the HOA debated her presence and neighbors whispered theories, she lived untouched by it, steady in who she was, unbothered by the need to prove anything to people who had already decided what they wanted to see. The moment that changed everything didn't come from a meeting or a complaint letter. It came on an ordinary evening when the neighborhood was settling into its usual routine. Dinners were finishing, sprinklers were clicking on, garage doors humming shut one by one. The kind of quiet everyone paid HOA fees to protect. Then the sound cut through it. Sharp. Wrong. A scream, followed by another. It came from the far end of the street, near the house with the half-lit porch and the broken gate that had been reported more than once and never fixed. At first, people hesitated. Porch lights flicked on. Curtains moved. Phones were picked up, but not yet dialed. The pause lasted only seconds, but it was long enough to reveal how unprepared everyone was to act. She was already moving. Shoes on. Keys in hand. No hesitation. No scanning for permission. She ran toward the sound, not fast and frantic, but controlled, efficient. A neighbor shouted something behind her, maybe her name, maybe a warning, but she didn't slow down. By the time she reached the house, the situation was clear. A man stood in the driveway, shouting, unsteady on his feet. A woman was backed against a car, crying, one arm raised to shield her face. The man turned when he saw her approach, surprise flashing across his face before irritation replaced it. He took a step toward her. She stopped at a distance that felt intentional, close enough to intervene, far enough to react. Her voice was calm when she spoke. Low, direct, not yelling, not pleading, just telling him to step away. The man laughed and said something dismissive. He didn't see a threat, just a woman with tattoos who didn't belong. What happened next unfolded quickly, but not chaotically. When the man lunged, she moved with precision that didn't look improvised. A shift of weight, a controlled grip. A takedown that put him on the ground before his shout fully formed. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't brutal. It was decisive. She restrained him, applying pressure in a way that kept him pinned without striking him again. People started arriving then. Neighbors running. Someone finally calling 911. Phones raised, recording. Gasps. Confusion. No one shouted at her to stop. No one told her to be careful. They watched, stunned, as the situation came under control without drama or excess. When the police arrived, she didn't argue or posture. She released the man when instructed, stood, stepped back, hands visible. She answered questions clearly. The woman she had protected clutched a blanket and nodded when officers asked who intervened. The story was simple. That night, the group chat exploded. Videos circulated. Messages piled up. Shock replaced speculation. People replayed the footage again and again, watching the same details they'd missed before. The stance, the timing, the restraint. This wasn't a lucky reaction. It was practiced. At the next HOA meeting, the tone shifted. The same people who had once questioned her presence now spoke carefully. Someone mentioned how fortunate the neighborhood was that she'd been there. Someone else suggested sending a thank you note. The word hero was used, then quickly softened, as if afraid of sounding dramatic. She didn't attend that meeting. She didn't need the acknowledgement. The police report spoke for itself. So did the woman who now waved at her every morning, gratitude written plainly across her face. In the days that followed, neighbors looked at her differently, not with suspicion, but with uncertainty. The image they'd built no longer fit. Tattoos no longer translated to danger. Silence no longer meant hostility. They struggled to reconcile the rules they lived by with the reality they'd witnessed. She returned to her routines without comment. Morning runs, quiet evenings, lawn trimmed, garage closed. The difference now was in how others watched her. The glances weren't searching for faults anymore. They were trying to understand what they'd missed all along, standing in the same neighborhood, judging from a distance, unaware that the person they'd labeled a problem was the one who acted when no one else did. The truth didn't come out in a dramatic announcement or a social media post. It surfaced the way facts often do when they can't be contained anymore. During the police follow-up, an officer asked a routine question about her training. She answered just as routinely, stating her background without emphasis. The pause that followed was subtle but noticeable. The officer asked her to repeat herself. Then he nodded, expression shifting, and wrote it down carefully. Word moved faster after that. Not gossip this time, but confirmation. Someone's cousin worked at the base nearby. Another neighbor had a brother-in-law in the Navy. Names were checked. Service records quietly verified. What had once been speculation hardened into something undeniable. She wasn't just trained. She wasn't just experienced. She was a former Navy SEAL, decorated, deployed multiple times, her career spanning places most of them only saw on the news. Suddenly, the tattoos had context. Dates, unit symbols, memorial markings. What they had dismissed as reckless decoration was, in reality, a record of survival, loss, loyalty, and missions that never made headlines. Ink that once made them uncomfortable now made them feel small. People reacted in different ways. Some felt embarrassed. Others felt defensive, insisting they'd never really judged her, only been cautious. A few leaned hard into admiration, telling anyone who would listen that they'd always sensed there was more to her. None of those reactions changed her behavior. She didn't correct their rewritten memories. At a small gathering thrown in her honor by a grateful neighbor, someone finally asked her directly, "What was it like? The teams, the training, the danger?" She paused, the way someone does when deciding how much truth a room can handle. She answered briefly, "It was hard. It mattered. It ended." Then she redirected the conversation to something ordinary. Weather, food, the streetlights that needed fixing. That restraint confused people. They expected stories, drama, pride. What they got was professionalism. The same professionalism that had kept her alive and effective for years. To her, service wasn't an identity to perform. It was something she'd done, something she carried quietly. The HOA president, the same man who had once driven by her house twice in one evening, stopped her one morning. He thanked her awkwardly, mentioned how impressive her career was, how honored the neighborhood was to have her. She listened, nodded, and said she liked the quiet. That was the end of the conversation. Neighbors began seeing the past everywhere. Her posture, her awareness, the way she stood with her back to walls at block parties, the way she scanned without staring. What they had once read as standoffishness now appeared disciplined, calculated, purposeful. Children asked questions more freely than adults. Were you really in the Navy? Did you jump out of planes? Did you fight bad guys? She answered some, deflected others. She never glorified it, never exaggerated. She made it clear that real life wasn't a movie and that most of the work was patience, teamwork, and responsibility. The revelation forced the neighborhood to confront an uncomfortable truth. They hadn't just misjudged her. They had been wrong in a way that mattered. They had treated a highly trained professional, someone who had carried national responsibility, as a problem because she didn't look the way they expected safety to look. The HOA rules didn't change. The lawn stayed neat. The newsletters kept coming. But the power dynamic shifted. Complaints felt smaller now. Assumptions felt riskier. People hesitated before making judgments based on appearance alone, at least for a while. She remained what she had always been. Quiet, capable, uninterested in approval. The only difference was that the mystery was gone for them, replaced with a truth that demanded respect whether they were ready for it or not. Respect didn't arrive all at once. It crept in through behavior before it ever showed up in words. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now paused to greet her. Conversations slowed when she passed, not out of suspicion anymore, but awareness. People stood a little straighter around her without realizing why. The HOA tone shifted noticeably. Emails softened. Language became careful, almost deferential. The same rules applied, officially, but enforcement felt different. No more vague notices. No more drive-bys. When questions came up, they were framed as requests instead of warnings. Authority had quietly changed hands, not through confrontation, but through competence revealed. At meetings, people spoke differently too. Complaints that once came easily were now filtered. Someone would start to criticize, then stop, glancing around as if reconsidering whether it was worth sounding petty. The presence of someone who had faced real consequences, real stakes, had a way of shrinking imagined problems. She didn't seek influence, but it followed her anyway. When she spoke, which wasn't often, people listened. Not because she raised her voice or demanded attention, but because she didn't waste words. A short comment about safety lighting led to immediate action. A suggestion about emergency preparedness resulted in a new protocol. The same neighbors who once questioned her belonging now treated her judgment as reliable. What unsettled them most was how little she changed. Respect didn't soften her or make her more social. She didn't start attending every gathering or telling stories to entertain. She remained selective, private, grounded. The power shift wasn't about dominance. It was about trust earned through action rather than appearance. The woman she had helped that night became one of her closest allies in the neighborhood. Not loud about it, just steady. When rumors tried to restart, they were shut down quickly. When someone made an offhand comment about looks or tattoos, there was pushback. The culture corrected itself in small, quiet ways. Children mirrored the change faster than adults. They stopped staring and started asking practical questions. How do you get that strong? Why do you run every morning? She answered when she felt like it. Sometimes she invited them to race her down the block. She always won. They laughed anyway. The HOA president eventually stepped down. His replacement asked her, cautiously, if she'd consider being an advisor on safety matters. She declined the title but offered help when needed. No badge, no committee, just availability. That was enough. What the neighborhood learned, slowly and uncomfortably, was that authority doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it lives quietly next door, mowing its lawn, following the rules that matter, ignoring the ones that don't. Sometimes the people you try to manage are the ones who know exactly what to do when things go wrong. The fear that once surrounded her dissolved into something closer to accountability. People thought twice before judging, before gossiping, before assuming. They had seen how wrong they could be, and that knowledge lingered. She never brought it up. never referenced the past or the shift in tone. For her, it wasn't a transformation. It was a correction. The neighborhood hadn't changed her position. Reality had. And reality had a way of rearranging hierarchies without asking permission, leaving behind a quiet understanding that respect isn't granted by rules or appearances, but revealed when pressure exposes who people really are.